June 6, 1944, 6:28 a.m. Private Robert Bob Anderson stands in Landing Craft 6, packed shoulder to shoulder with 30 other men, all heading toward a stretch of sand the Army calls Omaha Beach. The English Channel is rough today, violent even, and every wave that crashes over the sides of the Higgins boat adds another few inches of cold seawater to the floor. Bob looks down. The water is already past his ankles, and it's rising. He tries to shift his weight, but he can't. There's too much stuff strapped to his back, clipped to his belt, slung over his shoulders, stuffed in his pockets. He's carrying 68 pounds of equipment. For context, that's like wearing a fully loaded backpack while holding a second grader. And here's the thing that's making Bob's heart pound harder than the distant sound of naval guns. He can't swim. Now, you might be thinking, wait, they sent non-swimmers into an amphibious invasion? Oh, they absolutely did. And they gave them gear that would drag them straight to the bottom if they went under. The ramp is about to drop. In less than 60 seconds, Bob and thousands of men just like him will wade into chest-deep water under machine gun fire. Weighed down by everything the U.S. Army decided they needed to take a fortified beach from the most powerful military on Earth. Some of them will make it to the sand. Many won't. And the reason has more to do with the gears as much as with the German bullets raining down on them. Today, we're going to break down the D-Day loadout, every single item an American GI carried onto Omaha Beach. We'll talk about what each piece of gear was for, why it mattered, and why some of it became a death sentence the moment that ramp dropped. Because this isn't just a list of military equipment. This is the story of impossible choices, of young men burdened with far more than fabric and steel, and of the thin line between what you carry and what carries you under. Let's find out what Bob was really up against. Let's start from the inside out. Before Bob strapped on a single piece of combat gear, he was already wearing about 15 pounds of clothing. And that's when it was dry. First, the basics: cotton undershirt, wool underwear, wool socks. 2 pairs because trench foot was a very real nightmare the Army wanted to avoid. Over that, the M1937 wool flannel shirt. Then the wool field trousers. Now, wool was chosen for a reason. It insulates even when wet, which sounds great until you realize that wet wool also weighs about 3 times more than dry wool. Then came the M1941 field jacket. This thing was treated with a water-repellent finish, which, spoiler alert, didn't really work when you're wading through the ocean. The jacket had multiple pockets, reinforced elbows, and was designed to be tough. It was also heavy and restrictive when soaked. On his feet, the M1941 service shoes and M1938 leggings. These were basically leather work boots with a rubber sole. Good traction, decent ankle support, but leather and water, not friends. Once these got wet, they became heavy, stiff, and took forever to dry. Many guys would be fighting in soggy boots for days. And here's a brutal reality. Some men's boots filled with water the second they stepped off the ramp. Imagine trying to run through sand with 2 5-pound weights strapped to your feet. And then, of course, the most recognizable piece of the whole outfit, the M1 helmet. This wasn't just one helmet, it was 2 pieces. An outer steel shell that weighed about 2.5 pounds and an inner fiber liner with a leather suspension system. The genius was that the 2 pieces didn't touch. There was an air gap that helped absorb impact. Guys would thread the helmet with netting to attach foliage for camouflage, or stick cigarettes, photos, or playing cards in the band. It became personal. But on D-Day, most of these helmets were relatively clean. There hadn't been time to make them home yet. Now let's talk about what was in Bob's pockets. Because this is where the loadout stops being about the Army's needs and starts being about his. A photo of his girl back home, Betty, from Ohio. A letter from his mom he'd read so many times the creases were starting to tear. Maybe a lucky coin or a small Bible. These weren't issued by Uncle Sam. These were the things that reminded him why he was there. Around his neck, 2 dog tags on a beaded chain. One stayed with him no matter what. The other? That one was for, well, if things went bad, they'd take one tag and leave the other with the body for later identification. So that's the foundation. About 15 pounds of clothing, boots, and personal effects. He's not even armed yet, and he's already carrying the weight of home on his shoulders. But Bob wasn't going to France to look sharp in wool and leather. He was going there to fight, and for that, he needed weapons. A lot of weapons. The M1 Garand. General George S. Patton called it the greatest battle implement ever devised. And Bob was about to find out if Patton was right. This semi-automatic rifle weighed 9.5 pounds unloaded and stretched over 3.5 feet long. In a war where most enemy soldiers were still using bolt-action rifles, the Garand gave American GIs a massive advantage in firepower. While a German soldier with a Kar 98 Ki had to manually work a bolt between each shot, Bob could fire 8 rounds as fast as he could pull the trigger. In a close quarters fight, that difference could mean everything. The Garand used an in-block clip system, 8 rounds loaded at once. When you fired your last shot, the clip would eject with that famous ping sound, telling you, and unfortunately sometimes the enemy, that you were empty. Bob carried 80 rounds of .3006 ammunition for his Garand. That's 10 clips. Some guys carried more, closer to 100 rounds, but even 80 rounds added about 5 pounds to the load. Each bullet was a chunk of brass and lead that might save your life or take someone else's. And these weren't small bullets. The .30-06 Springfield cartridge was a full-power rifle round, designed to reach out and touch someone at 500 yards or more. This was serious firepower. But rifles aren't great for clearing bunkers or trenches. For that, Bob needed something more. Explosive. The MK2 fragmentation grenade. You probably know it better as the pineapple grenade because of those distinctive grooves on the outside. Each one weighed about 1.5 pounds. Pull the pin, release the spoon, and you had about 4 to 5 seconds before it turned into a storm of metal fragments traveling at over 3,000 feet per second. Bob carried 2 of these. That's 3 pounds of oh crap insurance for when things got too close for comfort. The trick was keeping them secure enough that they didn't fall off in the water, but accessible enough that you could grab one when you needed it right now. Attached to his rifle or carried in a scabbard on his belt was the M1905 bayonet. 16 inches of steel for when the shooting stopped and the ugly work began. The Army trained every soldier in bayonet combat, though the reality was that most men would never use it. But it wasn't just a weapon, it was a tool. Guys used bayonets to open rations, cut wire, dig, pry open crates, or a dozen other tasks the Army never officially sanctioned. Some guys also carried the M3 trench knife, a nasty piece of work with a 7-inch blade and built-in brass knuckle guard. This wasn't for opening your mail. This was for the kind of fighting nobody wants to think about. So let's do the math. M1 Garand, 9.5 pounds. Ammunition, 5 pounds. Grenades, 3 pounds. Bayonet and knife, another 2 pounds. That's almost 20 pounds of weapons and ammo alone. And here's the cruel irony that nobody talks about enough. All this firepower, this carefully selected arsenal, designed to help Bob fight and survive, most of it became completely useless the moment he hit the water. In those first minutes on Omaha Beach, very few men fired their weapons. They were too busy trying not to drown, trying to find cover, trying to simply survive. Rifles got clogged with sand and water. Grenades were lost in the chaos. The bullets that were supposed to save them just weighed them down. Weapons that got submerged in salt water would jam. Sand would get into every crevice. Some guys made it to the beach only to find their Garand wouldn't fire, leaving them defenseless with 20 pounds of useless steel in their hands. But Bob wasn't done loading up, not even close. Because so far we've only covered what made him a soldier. Now we need to talk about what made him a pack mule. And this is where things get really heavy. The M1928 haversack. If there was one single item in Bob's loadout that might kill him, this was it. This canvas backpack, when fully loaded, could weigh anywhere from 25 to 35 pounds depending on what you stuffed in it. And the Army had very specific ideas about what needed to be stuffed in it. Inside Bob's haversack, a wool blanket, about 4 pounds, a shelter half, basically 1/2 of a 2-man tent that weighed another 3 pounds, a mess kit for eating, an entrenching tool, a small folding shovel, another 2.5 pounds. That entrenching tool might seem minor, but it was survival. On a beach with zero natural cover, your ability to dig a hole fast could be the difference between living and dying. Every GI knew, if you can't find cover, make cover. Then there was the M1A2 gas mask in its canvas carrier, about 3 pounds of rubber and filters that, thankfully, nobody on D-Day would need to use. See, the Army remembered World War I. They remembered the mustard gas, the chlorine, the men dying in agony from chemical burns. So every soldier carried a gas mask, just in case Hitler decided to pull that card again. He didn't, but they didn't know that at 6:30 in the morning on June 6th. Add in a cleaning kit for the rifle, extra socks, a shaving kit, a raincoat or poncho, personal hygiene items, maybe a towel. All the little things that individually don't weigh much, but collectively, they add up fast. Now imagine you're Bob. You've got 15 pounds of uniform and boots, you've got 20 pounds of weapons and ammunition strapped to your body, and now someone's telling you to put this 30-pound backpack on your shoulders and jump into the ocean. But wait, it gets worse. Because some guys weren't just regular infantry. Some were engineers or demolition specialists, and they carried even more. Bangalore torpedoes, metal tubes packed with explosives designed to blow up barbed wire and clear obstacles. Each section weighed about 15 pounds, and you might carry 2 or 3 sections to link together. These things were essential for breaching the Atlantic Wall defenses, but they were also awkward, heavy, and filled with high explosives. If you took a bullet in the wrong place, well, let's just say you wouldn't know about it. Then there were satchel charges, canvas bags packed with TNT or composition explosives, another 15 to 20 pounds of open sesame for bunker doors and reinforced positions. So if you were regular infantry like Bob, you were carrying about 60 to 68 pounds. If you were an engineer, try 80 to 90 pounds. Some guys were carrying literally half their body weight in gear. Now, the army wasn't completely heartless. They knew men would be going into deep water. So they issued life preservers. The problem was, they didn't work the way you'd hope. The Type B5 life preserver, nicknamed the Mae West after the busty actress, because it inflated around your chest. It was supposed to keep you afloat if you went under. You could inflate it manually by blowing into tubes or trigger CO2 cartridges for instant inflation. In theory, this would pop you to the surface like a cork. In theory. In practice, if you inflated it while you were underwater, the buoyancy would force you up, but your 70-pound backpack wanted to drag you down. The result was your body getting pulled in 2 directions, thrashing, tumbling, drowning anyway. Some men inflated their vests too early and couldn't duck under obstacles or get low in the water. Others never got a chance to inflate them at all, and some found that after being compressed under all that gear, the vest had small punctures or leaks. That small hiss of escaping air was the sound of your backup plan failing. Every GI also carried a first aid kit. Inside, a compress bandage, sulfanilamide powder to prevent infection, and 2 morphine syrettes, small single-dose injectors. Those morphine syrettes were for serious wounds. If you or your buddy took a bad hit, you'd jab that needle through clothing and into muscle, then pin the empty tube to the guy's collar so medics would know he'd already had a dose, because morphine could save your life by preventing shock or kill you if you got too much. So let's take stock. Uniform and boots, 15 pounds. Weapons and ammo, 20 pounds. Haversack with all the gear, 30 pounds. Life vest, first aid kit, gas mask, miscellaneous equipment, another 3 to 5 pounds. Total weight, somewhere between 68 and 90 pounds depending on your role and what you personally decided to carry. For context, modern soldiers in Afghanistan carried similar loads, but they weren't jumping into the ocean with it. Every step was work, every movement was effort, and Bob hadn't even landed yet. He was still in the boat, water rising around his feet, trying not to think about what was coming. But we're still not done, because even with all this combat gear, the army knew Bob would need something else to survive. He'd need to eat, he'd need to drink, and water, as it turns out, is really, really heavy. 2 M1910 canteens, standard issue. Each one held a quart of water, that's 2 pounds when full. So right there, 4 more pounds on Bob's belt. Now you might be thinking, come on, it's just water. But here's the thing, you can't fight if you can't drink. Dehydration in combat is a fast track to heat exhaustion, confusion, and collapse. The problem was timing. Bob needed water to survive the fight, but in those first hours on Omaha Beach, every ounce of weight mattered more than staying hydrated later. It was a brutal calculation. Will I need this water more than I need to not drown right now? In his pack, Bob also carried halazone tablets for water purification. Because once you made it off the beach, if you made it off the beach, you'd be drinking from streams, wells, or whatever water source you could find. And amoebic dysentery kills just as sure as bullets, only slower and more miserably. For food, Bob carried K rations. These were individual meal boxes, breakfast, lunch, or dinner, each designed to provide around 3,000 calories in a compact package. Inside each box, a canned meat product. And we use the term meat loosely here. Could be chopped pork and eggs, ham and lima beans, or the infamous mystery meat that GIs swore was made from everything the army couldn't identify. You also got crackers or biscuits, a fruit bar, a chocolate bar, a packet of instant coffee, sugar tablets, chewing gum, and 4 cigarettes. Were they delicious? Absolutely not. Were they edible? Technically. Did they keep you alive? That was the whole point. K rations were about nutrition and shelf life, not taste. You could drop them in mud, salt water, or leave them in the sun for days, and they'd still be just as mediocre as when they were packed. Bob also carried D-ration chocolate bars. Now, don't get excited. These weren't your grandma's chocolate chip cookies. The D-ration was specifically formulated to not taste good and to not melt, even in high heat. The army didn't want soldiers eating these as snacks. They were emergency rations only. Each bar was about 600 calories of dense, hard, barely sweet chocolate that you practically needed a hammer to break apart. Guys would shave pieces off with their knives or soften them in coffee if they had time. One soldier described it as tasting like boiled sawdust with a hint of cocoa. But when you haven't eaten in 12 hours and you're burning thousands of calories just staying alive, that sawdust chocolate was a gift from heaven. And then there were the cigarettes. 4 in every K ration, plus whatever personal supply guys brought with them. Now we know today that smoking kills. But in 1944, cigarettes were currency, comfort, and courage in a small paper tube. They were something to do with your hands during the endless waiting. They were a trade good, worth more than money in some situations. And that brief nicotine hit could steady your nerves before the shooting started. The Zippo lighter became almost as iconic as the M1 helmet. Windproof, reliable, and damn near indestructible. Guys would get them engraved with names, dates, or messages. Some still work today, 80 years later. So with the canteens, the rations, the water purification tablets, and the little extras, Bob was carrying another 5 to 6 pounds of sustainment gear. Not much compared to everything else, but it adds up. We're now at 73 to 96 pounds depending on Bob's specific role. That's more than most people's checked luggage on a flight, and Bob was expected to run, fight, and survive with it. But here's the thing about all these numbers we've been throwing around. The pounds, the ounces, the calculations, they don't really capture what it felt like. Because right now, Bob is still in that landing craft, the water is still rising, the beach is getting closer, and in about 30 seconds, everything he's carrying is going to try to kill him. The question isn't what was he carrying anymore. The question is, what's he going to keep carrying when that ramp drops? 6:30 a.m. The landing craft lurches to a stop. Bob feels it hit something, maybe a sandbar, maybe an obstacle. The engine revs trying to push closer, but this is it. This is as far as the boat goes. The ramp begins to drop, and instantly the world becomes chaos. Machine gun fire rips across the ramp. Men at the front are hit before they even step off. Others push forward because stopping means dying. The guys behind you need to move. Bob jumps, or maybe he's pushed. It doesn't matter. He hits the water and immediately realizes they're not in knee-deep surf. The landing craft stopped 50 yards out. The water is over his head. He tries to push up, but he's not moving. The 75 pounds on his back wants to stay down, and the life vest around his chest wants to go up, and Bob is just caught in the middle, spinning, disoriented. His fingers find the buckle on his haversack. He rips it free and feels the weight drop away, watching it tumble into the dark water below. 30 pounds gone in an instant. The ocean floor off Omaha Beach became a museum that morning. Haversacks, rifles, ammunition cans, Bangalore torpedoes, satchel charges, all that carefully issued gear scattered across the sand 20 feet down. Bob surfaces, gasps air, and sees hell. The beach is still 40 yards away, and he's got to cross open water while German machine guns sweep the surf. He starts moving forward. Each step is a struggle. The surf is rough, his boots are full of water, his uniform is soaked and heavy. His rifle is still slung across his chest, but he doesn't even think about firing it. He's just trying to get there. All around him, guys are making the same calculation Bob just made underwater. Drop the gear or die with it. Grenades splash into the surf, ammunition bandoliers are cut free. Gas masks abandoned. The ones who make it to the sand aren't in much better shape. They're exhausted, waterlogged, and half of them no longer have the equipment they were supposed to use to take this beach. In the first 30 minutes on Omaha Beach, it's estimated that hundreds of men drowned or were pulled under by their gear before they ever faced enemy fire. The weight that was supposed to help them survive became an anchor. Years later, survivors would talk about seeing men simply disappear beneath the water. One moment they were there, the next, gone. No explosion, no visible wound. Just the weight and the waves. Robert Bob Anderson, our composite soldier we've been following, he represents thousands of young men who face this exact scenario. Some of them made it, many didn't. The guys who survived that first push onto Omaha Beach often did so because they made a choice: mission or life. Training said, keep your gear. Instinct said, drop it and swim. By the time the first wave actually made it off the beach and started pushing inland, they were carrying a fraction of what they'd loaded onto those boats with. They had their rifles, maybe they had some ammunition if it wasn't water damaged. They had determination and adrenaline and luck. In the days after D-Day, recovery teams would wade into the surf collecting equipment. Rifles by the hundreds, ammunition cans, backpacks, boots, helmets. Some of it could be salvaged, most couldn't. And all of it represented a soldier's burden, carried for miles, for days, right up until the moment when it nearly killed them. And some of the gear they found still had owners nearby, men who never got the chance to make the choice. Men for whom the weight was just too much. Today, if you walk on Omaha Beach, it's peaceful. Tourists take photos, kids build sandcastles. The water is just water, cold, salty, indifferent. But every once in a while, a storm will shift the sand and something will surface: a rusted canteen, a corroded rifle part, a buckle from a haversack. The beach still holds pieces of that morning, still carries the weight of what happened here. So let's come back to the question we started with. What did an American GI carry onto Omaha Beach? 15 pounds of wool uniform and leather boots, 20 pounds of weapons and ammunition, 30 pounds of combat gear and supplies, 5 pounds of food and water. Total weight: somewhere between 68 and 96 pounds depending on role and personal choices. For a lot of these guys, that was more than half their body weight. For context, modern US soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan carried similar loads, often 60 to 100 pounds. But they had body armor, advanced load-bearing equipment, and they weren't jumping into the ocean. The burden of the combat soldier hasn't gotten lighter. We've just changed what we carry. But this was never really just about the physical weight, was it? The 70 pounds of gear was measurable, countable, something you could drop if you had to. The real weight, the weight Bob and thousands like him really carried, you couldn't measure that on a scale. The weight of responsibility, of knowing your buddies were counting on you. The weight of fear that you'd try to hide from the guy next to you because he was just as scared. The weight of hope that you'd see home again, that this would all mean something, that you wouldn't let anyone down. These were kids, really. Most of them were 19, 20, 21 years old. A lot of them had never been more than 50 miles from home before the Army shipped them across an ocean to storm a beach held by an enemy that had 4 years to prepare for them. 9,387 Americans are buried at the Normandy American Cemetery. Many of them fell on D-Day. Some drowned in the surf, pulled down by the weight of their gear before they ever reached the sand. Each one of those white crosses represents someone who carried that same burden we've been talking about. The M1 Garand, the wool uniform, the haversack, the canteen, the photo in the pocket, and each one made it further than their gear did. The rifles rusted on the ocean floor. The uniforms rotted away. The rations were eaten or lost. But what these men carried in terms of courage, sacrifice, and duty, that's still here. The loadout of an American GI on D-Day was a physical burden that would challenge even the strongest among us. It was poorly distributed, too heavy, and in many cases directly contributed to men drowning or being unable to fight effectively. But they made it work. Through sheer grit, improvisation, and courage, the ones who survived that first hellish hour adapted. They dropped what they didn't need, kept what they had to have, and pushed forward. By the end of D-Day, 156,000 Allied troops had landed across 5 beaches. Omaha was the bloodiest, with over 2,400 American casualties. But they took it. They held it, and they began the liberation of Europe. So when you see photos of D-Day soldiers, when you see them weighed down with all that gear, when you wonder how they did it, now you know not just what they carried, but why it mattered and what it cost them to carry it. 70 to 90 pounds of equipment. The weight of an entire war compressed into a backpack and strapped to the body of a kid from Ohio or Texas or California who just wanted to do his part. The weight of D-Day wasn't just what they carried onto the beach. It was what they carried with them for the rest of their lives, and what we carry forward in their memory.